Alrighty, good morning or good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today I want to do a really quick video on our pattern project. So this is the project that I've been hinting at. This is going to stand in place of our test for chapters 6 and 4. So we have a project instead which basically looks at different linear relationships. And we're going to start to look at the difference between linear relationships and nonlinear relationships. So for these, you're going to choose any 4 patterns from this website here. So I'm going to switch over to this website in just a moment, but I want to talk about the patterns first. Specifically, you need 2 that are linear and 2 that are nonlinear. Then for each pattern, you have to show a picture of the original pattern. So you can draw it, print it, however. So for example, if your pattern is a star and then you have stars like this, and then your third pattern is stars like this, then you're going to include those original 3 in it. Then you're going to show the next 2 steps of your pattern. So add 2 more on. So for example, if they show you pattern 1, 2, and 3, then you are responsible for drawing patterns 4 and 5. So you would be doing 4 and 5. So you would follow the pattern that they've given. So 4 might look like this, and then 5 would look like this. Now keep in mind, all of the patterns that are on this website have some sort of traceable pattern to them. So don't just add on at random, look for that pattern and continue them on. Next step, explain in writing how the pattern is changing. You can include math, numbers, symbols, operations, but basically I want you to explain in words how this would work. And what I mean by that is if someone had no idea what the pattern was, you're describing what the shape you're adding or what object you're including and how you are adding them. So don't just say add 2 stars each time. If we're using this example pattern, explain where you are adding them into the pattern, because if I start with 1 star and then I add 2 stars, it might look like this. So my pattern, while numerically will look the same, visually it'll look very different. So explain to them how you are designing this so it'll look identical. And keep in mind, try to think about what someone would try to do if they weren't looking at the pattern itself. Next, you're going to create a table of values. So some sort of X and Y, but you have to be sure on what you're counting. So this would be pattern number, and I might say number of stars, or whatever I'm counting. I'm going to create some type of graph, so I'm going to graph this visually. So I'm going to have a table of values, and I'll have something that looks like that. For this case, you can keep it down to that 1 quadrant just because we're talking about patterns, but keep in mind this is just a regular XY axis, so it would actually continue. Then you're going to identify whether or not it's a linear pattern or not and back it up with evidence. Now, this can be arguing it makes a straight line on a graph, or I increase the amount each time, or it increases by the same amount each time. Use the information that you've already included. Now, this is where it splits up. For the linear patterns, you have to tell me the equation and you want to do it in y equals mx plus b form. So from the graph, you need to tell me the equation. And then as a bonus, for those of you who are looking to extend your math and get kind of a hint of grade 10, I want you to try and find the 2 nonlinear equations. However, this is optional, it's bonus. These will look very different and they are rather challenging until you know kind of the setup. Now, all of this, you're doing this for each pattern, so you're going to do 4 of these. So there's 4 graphs, 4 patterns, 4 table of values, 4 explanations, etc. And all of this has to be in some sort of nice and easy to nice visual format. So this could be a poster, it could be a brochure, it could be a booklet. Some of the patterns that I'll show you are 3D in nature, so they actually have pop-ups to them or are made out of Legos. So however you want to do it, you can also build them. A couple things to keep in mind. when you're counting things, make sure that you're being explicit about what you're counting. So here's an example. If I'm counting these squares, they're actually made out of sticks. So am I counting the sticks or am I counting the squares? So be clear. Say that you are counting squares, for example. You can pick either one, but don't flip-flop between them or try to include both of them. Stick to one thing. The more ambiguous or like uncertain it is, then it's going to be a lot harder to follow your reasoning. So just be clear about what you're counting, because there's a number of different things in these patterns that you could be counting. The other thing to note is that the first thing that shows up, so this part right here, is pattern number 1. This starts at pattern number 1 as well. We're not starting midway through, so use that as your pattern number 1. In terms of supplies, I will have some time for work periods. I have access to rulers, scissors, all that kind of stuff, but I'm lacking construction paper, tiles, and that kind of stuff. So just ask. Some of the things I will have, some that I won't. So I may not have everything. And one thing that I definitely don't have is fine liners. So if you need fine liners for this project or you want to use fine liners, make sure you are bringing your own. There will be a penalty for late projects in the sense that by the time this is done, our course will basically be done. So there is a very hard limit on when you can get this handed in. It's going to be due likely at the end of next week or on the Monday after, just to give you that extra weekend, but I haven't decided on one of those dates. But really, we're getting about a week and a half for this. So keep that in mind. It is fast paced, and after that, there's only about a week and a half of class left anyways, so that the amount of time that you get will really determine how much, or like really limit how much can be marked if you're getting this in at the last minute. Secondly, the grading rubric is included. Look at it and use it. So I have the full rubric here. Basically, each pattern is out of 23 points. The one exception is that the nonlinear is going to be out of 19. The reason for this is that for the nonlinear, this column is bonus. And when I mark these, I mark them all together on one sheet. So one of the things that you will notice is that it'll look messy. I'll have something like pattern 1 in green, pattern 2 in purple, pattern 3 in blue, and pattern 4 in black. And when I mark these, I will color code my marking. So if you're wondering how you did on the pattern 3, you would follow the blue circles. And this is just to save paper, and mostly I find people get roughly around the same for each one, so it's usually pretty organized, and it just saves on paper. The last piece is for the marking. I'll also be handing in a card like this to you, which will show each individual pattern's overall score. Again, this will be 19, and this will be 19 just for the two nonlinears, and then the overall project is out of 8. So this is just, how does everything look? Did you hand it in on time, and is it creative and follow the guidelines? The change, though, is that this is not out of 100, this is out of 92. And 92 is a lot of marks to plug into my ed. So what I generally do is on my ed, to make this about worth the same as a test, I give it a mark out of 46. So I cut the marks in half. That way it's roughly the same number of marks as a test. Okay, let's flip over to the website and I'll show you what you are going to be looking at if you want to get ahead. Alrighty, so this is visualpatterns.org. This is accessible by mobile or computers. It has roughly 440 patterns to it. So here's the first 20. If I click on them, it brings them up, and usually it'll show me the first 3 patterns, but some of them will show me more, so this one shows me up to 4. A lot of the patterns will be similar, but a lot of them will be different. If I click here, you'll see that you get different amounts. So there are some that are 3D, for example. There are others that are images. If I continue on, there are other ones that are a little bit harder to follow, but again, 3D shapes. A few to avoid, let's see if I can find them here. There are a few that are a little bit harder to follow. This one here, I'm not quite sure which one they're talking about in terms of pattern. I'm assuming that this green one here is pattern 1, the green and the red is pattern 2, this is pattern 3, this is pattern 4, and this is pattern 5. But again, it's not clear, so there are certain ones that are better than others and that you can avoid. But again, there are so many here that you can pick and choose. There are some with candy corns that you can use if you want to use actual things and make a model. There's ones with pictures. Let me pull up one more. See if I can find it. There's a few with money. There's a few with Star Wars. I'm having a hard time finding the one that I'm specifically looking for, but there's a few in the middle that give a 3D generated model that'll actually load up another website. I would avoid using those because they're very hard to track. The other ones that I would avoid are at the very end where they look like this. The pattern is that they're removing a certain number of blocks each time, or a certain fraction of them each time. But as far as I could tell, and the person who was looking at this, is that it's not obvious what the pattern of removal is, so it might be that they're removing them at random. So if there is that randomness, try to avoid them. It's a lot harder to describe what you're doing to a person, or that written part is a lot harder. And keep in mind also artistic talent and time. There's a few of these that are really cool patterns that are really, really, really hard to draw well if you don't have access to software. I'm trying to find the one that I just showed someone. Basically, it is a fractal pattern that keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I'm not having luck finding it, unfortunately. Oh, here it is. So this one, love the pattern. It starts with a 5 sort of on like a 5-sided dice, and it keeps that 5-sided dice, but now all of the dots are made out of 5-sided dice, and then it continues on where each dot is made out of the previous one. But you can see how big this one gets. The next one is going to be 5 of these in a 5-cross pattern, and you have to do one more larger than that. So if you have access to a computer, you can easily make this pattern work. If you're drawing it by hand, this is very hard to do well. So keep in mind, think about the medium that you're going to be using when you do these. In any case, that's all I have for you today. Take a look at this if you have time. We're going to have a couple of work periods, but we're basically going to be jumping into chapter 6 when we get back. So getting a head start on this is probably preferable. In any case, that's all I have for you today. Take care, stay safe, have a good one. Bye.